I fumbled with the keys as I pushed open the door to my apartment, stepping inside like a ghost of myself. The air felt stale, untouched, the way a space does when it stops being a home and becomes just a place where someone exists. My bag slid, from my shoulder to the floor, a dull thud against the hardwood. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the silence. It was over. After 3 years, Nathan had looked me in the eye and told me he didn't feel the same anymore. I hadn't argued. What was there to say? You can't negotiate love back into existence. I exhaled and forced myself to move, kicking off my shoes and heading for the fridge. I wasn't hungry, but doing something felt better than doing nothing. The cold light of the refrigerator spilled onto my face as I stared at its contents. A half-empty bottle of orange juice, leftover takeout, eggs I'd probably never use. Nathan used to make breakfast every Saturday morning, standing barefoot in my kitchen, always burning the toast but never caring. I slammed the fridge shut, pressing my palms against the counter. My chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out and replaced with lead. It wasn't just the breakup, it was the knowing. Knowing I had to wake up tomorrow and the next day and the next, carrying this emptiness like a second skin. Somewhere through the wall, music started playing. Soft, at first, then louder. A steady beat, not obnoxious but enough to break the silence. I recognized the apartment it was coming from. Julian. I didn't know much about him, only that he lived next door and had the kind of effortless confidence I could never quite grasp. He was always coming and going, his door opening to laughter, to the scent of cologne and something spicy cooking. He'd said hi to me once, months ago, flashing an easy smile as he balanced a grocery bag in one hand and his keys in the other. I'd muttered a polite response and hurried inside. I wasn't great at small talk, and he seemed like someone who had no trouble filling silences. I sank onto the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, the soft hum of Julian's music filtering through the thin walls. It wasn't the sad kind of music people played when they were heartbroken. It was warm, rich with life. It made the apartment feel less empty. I closed my eyes and listened. I stepped out of my apartment the next morning, still feeling like I was moving through water. The air in the hallway was cool, the kind of crispness that belonged to mornings when the world felt too awake for how tired I was. I barely registered the sound of a door opening beside me until a voice cut through. "My fog, morning, stranger?" I looked up to see Julian leaning casually against his doorframe, coffee cup in hand, his dark curls still slightly damp from a shower. He was dressed effortlessly, fitted jeans, a loose button-up that hung open just enough to be distracting. He had that perpetual air of someone who belonged exactly where he was, like the world bent a little to make space for him. "Hey," I mumbled, shifting the strap of my bag higher on my shoulder. I hadn't spoken to anyone since the breakup, and my voice felt foreign, stiff from disuse. Julian studied me for a beat, his head tilting slightly. "Rough night?" I let out a humorless laugh. Something like that. He didn't pry, but something in his gaze softened, like he already knew. Maybe I wasn't as good at hiding things as I thought. "Well," he said, stretching a little, his shirt pulling against his chest, "I have a theory that wallowing alone in an apartment is the worst possible way to get over anything." I huffed, rubbing the back of my neck. "And what's the best way?" A slow grin spread across his face. "Coming out with me tonight." I blinked. "What?" "There's a bar downtown," he said, shifting his weight. "LGBTQ plus friendly. Great music, and a bartender who makes the strongest margaritas I've ever had. You should come." I stared at him, my instinctual response bubbling up. "No, I'm fine. No, I'd rather just be alone." But I hesitated. Julian was watching me with that same easy confidence, like he wasn't pressuring me, just offering me something I didn't know I needed. And maybe I did need it. "I don't know," I started, but he cut me off with a knowing smile. "You've been hiding in there long enough," he said, nodding toward my apartment. "One drink. Worst case scenario, you hate it, and I walk you back home. No pressure." I exhaled slowly. There was something about Julian that made it hard to say no. It wasn't just the charm, though that was definitely part of it. It was the way he made things feel easy, Like maybe the world wasn't so heavy when you had someone to share it with. "All right," I said finally. His grin widened. "Good choice, neighbor." As I walked away, I could still feel the warmth of his gaze on my back, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to anticipation. The bar was alive in a way that made me feel like I was standing on the outside of something I didn't quite understand. The lights were low, pulsing in time with the music, a beat that thrummed beneath my skin. Laughter and conversation wove through the air, bodies pressing close, hands lingering, lips brushing against ears as people leaned in to talk. It was effortless for them. The way they moved, the way they fit. I didn't fit. Julian led the way through the crowd, glancing back, to make sure I was still following. His confidence was magnetic, the kind of presence that parted the room without demanding it. He reached the bar and leaned against it, motioning for me to do the same. "First drink's on me," he said over the music. "What's your poison?" I hesitated. Just a beer?" Julian gave me a look like I had personally offended him. "Noah, come on. You're in a place with rainbow lights and a drag queen DJ. You cannot order just a beer." I huffed a quiet laugh despite myself. "Fine. You pick." Minutes later, he handed me something bright and citrusy, the rim coated in sugar. "Welcome to the dark side," he said with a wink before clinking his glass against mine. It didn't take long for him to slip into conversation with people around us, introducing me, pulling me into jokes I barely understood, making it impossible to just stand there and fade into the background. I wasn't good at this, but Julian made it easier. His teasing was light, his presence solid, his laughter quick and warm. He never pushed too hard, never made me feel like I had to be something I wasn't. Still, the noise, the movement, the weight of my own thoughts pressed in on me. I found myself pulling back, shrinking even as the night carried on. Julian caught on, his eyes flicking to me in that way that said he noticed more than I wanted him to. He nudged his shoulder against mine. "All right?" I swallowed, staring down at my drink. I don't know." I exhaled, words sticking to my ribs. "I feel like I don't belong here. Or anywhere, really." Julian was quiet for a moment, and when I glanced at him, I expected pity. But there wasn't any. Just something softer, steadier. "You're not lost," he said simply. "You're just finding new places to fit." I didn't know why that hit me the way it did. Maybe because it wasn't some empty reassurance, not some forced optimism. It was just the truth, spoken by someone who didn't need me to be anything other than what I was in that moment. I met his gaze, and for the first time that night, I let myself breathe. Julian became a constant in my life without me even realizing it. What started as casual run-ins in the hallway turned into late-night conversations on his couch. Mugs of tea balanced on our knees as we talked about everything and nothing. He had a way of making the world feel smaller, more manageable, like it wasn't something I had to brace myself against all the time. He was more than just the confident flirt I had assumed him to be. Beneath the teasing smiles and easy laughter, there was a depth that caught me off guard. He had been through heartbreaks too, ones that left cracks in places he didn't always talk about. But when he did, he spoke about them the way someone speaks about old scars, acknowledging the pain, but refusing to be defined by it. "People leave," he had told me one night, swirling the last of his wine in his glass. "But you don't have to let that mean you're unlovable." It stuck with me. Maybe because, deep down, I wasn't sure I believed it. It was in the small things, too. The way he always made sure I had an extra blanket when we sat on his balcony, on colder nights. The way he never let me fall into silence for too long. The way his hand would linger just a second too long when he passed me something, fingertips ghosting against my skin. One evening, I was laughing at something he said, something stupid and ridiculous, when he reached out, his fingers brushing the side of my cheek. I froze, feeling the warmth of his touch, the soft pressure as he swept something away. "Eyelash," he murmured, voice quieter than before. Our eyes met, and something thick settled between us. I felt it. This pull, this awareness that hadn't been there before, or maybe it had, and I had been too afraid to name it. My stomach tightened, a rush of something I wasn't sure how to handle. Julian's fingers lingered for a moment longer before he pulled away, a small, knowing smile curving his lips. He didn't push, didn't call attention to it. But I felt it, and I knew he did too, and that terrified me. I started keeping my distance after that, not in an obvious way, but I felt it happening, this slow retreat into myself. I stopped answering texts as quickly, found excuses when Julian asked if I wanted to come over. It wasn't that I didn't want to. It was that I wanted to too much. Julian noticed. Of course he did. He had always been able to read me better than I liked. One night, I found him waiting outside my door, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by something quieter, something I didn't want to face. "You're pulling away," he said. No accusation in his voice, just fact. I sighed, looking down at my feet. I don't want to mess this up." "This?" he echoed, his brow lifting. "Noah, we're not even anything yet, and you're already afraid of ruining it?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know if I can do this." Julian's expression flickered, something close to hurt crossing his face before he schooled it away. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I won't be your rebound," he said finally. "But I also won't pretend there's nothing here." His voice softened. "I don't need you to have everything figured out. I just need to know, if you want this." I didn't know what to say, because wanting wasn't the problem. It was the idea of having it. Something real, something that could slip through my fingers just as easily as everything else had. Julian searched my face for a long moment before nodding to himself, like he had already accepted that I wasn't ready. He stepped back, hands sliding into his pockets. "When you figure it out," he murmured, "you know where to find me." And then he was gone, leaving me standing in my doorway, my chest tight with something that felt an awful lot like regret. I told myself I was just giving it space, that I needed time to sort through my feelings, to figure out if what I felt for Julian was real, or if I was just grasping for something, someone, to pull me out of the wreckage of my breakup. But the more I tried to convince myself, the clearer it became that I was just running. Julian didn't chase me, he didn't flood my phone with texts, didn't show up unannounced demanding answers, but I felt his absence like a missing puzzle piece. Our late-night conversations stopped. The casual touches, the teasing smiles, gone. He was still there, in the apartment next to mine. But it felt like we were strangers again, and I hated it. I caught glimpses of him through the crack of my doctor when he passed by in the hallway, laughing with friends, his voice warm and unbothered. I told myself he was fine without me, that maybe I had been imagining the tension between us, that maybe he had already moved on. But I knew better. When I finally worked up the courage to face him, it was late, and the hallway was dimly lit, shadows stretching along the walls. Julian was just getting home, keys dangling from his fingers, when he saw me standing by his door. He paused, one brow lifting, but he didn't say anything. I swallowed, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "Can we talk?" Something flickered across his face before he sighed, shifting his weight. "Yeah, sure." Inside, his apartment felt the same but different, like I had been away too long. The scent of something warm and spiced lingered in the air. A record spun lazily on the turntable, the music low. I had always liked it here, always felt safe here. And maybe that was the problem. Julian leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing his arms. He wasn't giving me an easy way out of this. I licked my lips, my throat suddenly dry. "I don't know how to do this." His expression didn't change, but I saw the way his fingers curled slightly against his bicep. "Do what?" "This. Us." The word felt big, too big. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now." Julian exhaled, shaking his head. "Noah, I'm not asking you to have it all figured out, but you are pulling away, and I need to know why." I looked down, tracing the grain of his countertop with my fingertips. "I just got out of a long relationship. I don't know if I'm ready for something new." Julian studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I get that," he said, voice steady. But tell me the truth. Are you not ready? Or are you just scared? My stomach twisted. I didn't have an answer, not one that wouldn't sound like an excuse. Julian pushed off the counter, stepping closer, his gaze searching mine. I won't be your rebound, Noah, but I also won't pretend there's nothing here. His voice softened, but there was something unwavering beneath it. So, if you don't want this, if you really don't feel this, tell me, and I'll let it go. My breath hitched. I wanted to say something, anything, but my thoughts were tangled in knots. Because I did feel it. I had felt it for weeks now. The pull, the comfort, the way Julian saw me in a way that no one else did. But the idea of wanting him, having him, meant the possibility of losing him too. Julian sighed when I didn't answer. Not frustrated, just resigned. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. Take your time, he murmured. But don't take too long. And with that, he turned away, leaving me standing there with my heart in my throat and the truth clawing its way to the surface. The rain came in a slow, steady rhythm, drumming softly against the city, blurring the streetlights into golden smears. It was late, too late for me to have any excuse to be here, but I stood outside Julian's door anyway, heart pounding in my throat. I almost turned around, almost convinced myself to walk away, to shove everything back down where it was safer, where it couldn't touch me. But then the door swung open, and Julian was there, brows lifting slightly in surprise. Noah. His voice was quieter than I expected. Maybe because of the late hour, or maybe because he wasn't sure what I was doing here either. I swallowed hard. Can I come in? He hesitated for a second before stepping back, nodding toward the balcony. I followed him out, the air thick with the scent of rain. The city stretched out before us, dark and endless. The kind of view that made you feel small in the best way. Julian leaned against the railing, hands gripping the cool metal. He didn't say anything. He was waiting for me to speak first. I took a breath, my pulse hammering. I'm scared. Julian exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, I got that part, I huffed, looking down at my hands. I thought after my breakup I couldn't feel anything again. That whatever part of me was capable of love just shut down. My fingers curled against my palms. But then I broke off, shaking my head, frustrated with the way the words stuck. You make me feel something I thought was gone. Julian turned his head slightly, watching me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, God, his eyes held something deep, something I wanted to drown in. Then, finally, he smiled. Just a small, lopsided thing, but it made my chest ache. Then stop overthinking, he murmured. And just feel it. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe both of us at the same time. But suddenly, Julian was right there, so close I could see the raindrops clinging to his eyelashes, the way his breath curled in the cool night air. And then his lips were on mine. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, tentative, like we were both trying to memorize this moment, trying to make sure it was real. His hand lifted, fingers pressing lightly against the side of my neck, and I shivered, warmth flooding through me despite the cool air. I kissed him back. Really, kissed him, and it felt like breathing for the first time in weeks, like stepping into something that had been waiting for me all along. When we finally pulled back, Julian's forehead rested lightly against mine, his thumb brushing absent-mindedly over my jaw. See? He whispered. That wasn't so scary. Was it? I let out a shaky breath, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Terrifying, I admitted. Julian just laughed, soft and warm, and kissed me again. I woke up to the soft light of morning filtering through my blinds, the world still quiet except for the distant hum of the city waking up. For the first time in a long time, my chest didn't feel heavy. The weight I had been carrying, of heartbreak, of uncertainty, of fear, was still there, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. I turned over, reaching for my phone on the nightstand. A new message from Julian. Brunch at my place. No overthinking. Aloud, I huffed out a laugh, rubbing a hand over my face. Of course. He knew me too well already. Knew I'd wake up questioning everything, picking apart last night like it was something fragile instead of something real. I stared at the message for a moment longer, then typed back, "On my way." And just like that, the hesitation eased. I didn't have to have everything figured out right now. I didn't need a roadmap for what this was or where it would go. All I had to do was take the next step. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel terrifying at all.